The U.S. military has a machine that can levitate UFO metal. This is what a Stanford top scientist confirms. Professor Gary Nolan is one of the most reputable experts examining the enigma of unidentified aerial phenomena, UAPs, what we call UFOs. He's been studying UAP materials for many months and has made numerous astonishing statements about UFOs. His contributions lend credibility to this particular mystery, which many mainstream scientists hesitate to discuss. Dr. Nolan works at Stanford University as a professor of immunology. He was nominated for the Nobel Prize, which is, of course, a very big honor. Shows how credible he is. He's known as one of the best immunologists in the world. He has many patents and has written a lot of research papers. He's also started 2 companies listed on NASDAQ stock exchange because of his successful inventions. In June 2022, Australian investigative journalist Ross Coulthart interviewed Dr. Nolan and learned from him shocking UAP information that the U.S. government has been investigating for the past few years. Dr. Nolan said that one thing he is sure about is that we do not know what UAPs are. We do not know, he said, that there is something here, something that I think defies explanation, but that something can be studied from a scientific viewpoint. Although this interview was recorded in 2022, Dr. Nolan adheres to David Grush's statement that the U.S. government has been lying about UAPs for the last 60 to 70 years. He believes the reason behind this is that the U.S. government itself does not know what they are dealing with. Dr. Nolan says, absolutely there is a cover-up. I mean, there has been both a cover-up and a disinformation campaign to make people appear as if they were crazy. Coulthart questions the potential dangers of admitting one's thoughts on these mysterious events, to which Dr. Nolan responds, I think it's dangerously necessary, ignoring the physics of what these things are capable of doing. Coulthart further asks, let's talk about it. What is it? And Dr. Nolan replies, I wish I knew. Whatever it is appears to be so far advanced from us that it beggars understanding. When pressed further by Coulthart if he believes the phenomenon to be of human origin, Dr. Nolan decisively states, I'm sure it's not human. I think it's whatever it is. It's been here a long time, and certainly has been here longer than we've been civilized, so that the very least, who really owns the planet and who was here first, I'm not sure who it was. Dr. Nolan explains he studied the brains of pilots who claim to have encountered the phenomena. After their UFO encounters, they all got damaged or hurt, such as buzz noises in their head, got sick, etc. Most of them have had similar kinds of bad things. He showed the MRIs to some people that revealed damage in the middle of the basal ganglia, an area responsible for motor control and other core brain functions, including intuition. Dr. Nolan said the damage should have killed those people, yet they were alive. He obtained MRIs of some prior to their encounters, and they had the damage, so they were most likely born with it. These are all so-called high-functioning people. They are pilots who are making split-second decisions, intelligence officers in the field, etc., he said. Alleged UFO material. Former Pentagon UFO official Luis Elizondo shared a true eye-opening statement in his interview with James Indoli of Engaging the Phenomenon on June 11, 2021. They discussed crash retrievals and materials related to unidentified flying objects, UFOs, or unidentified aerial phenomena, UAPs. Elizondo acknowledged the sensitivity of the topic and the potential consequence of discussing it openly. However, Elizondo expressed his belief that the U.S. government does not possess exotic materials but could not provide further details due to the lack of transparency from the government. He mentioned that 3 layers of analysis that can be conducted on a piece of material, namely physical, chemical, and atomic or nano-level research. Coulthart asked the Stanford professor about his research on a particular material known as bismuth magnesium. Dr. Nolan described it as a layered substance consisting primarily of bismuth with traces of lead and magnesium. Despite his assessment of its isotope ratios showing nothing out of the ordinary, he expressed his intent to study a significantly larger sample in the future, and this expanded sample size would allow him to conduct more comprehensive tests, potentially shedding light on its properties. Terahertz transmitter. Coulthard speculated on the material's ability to levitate when exposed to a specific waveform. While Dr. Nolan acknowledged hearing about such claims, he had not personally witnessed or tested the phenomenon. When pressed by Coulthard about whether he had attempted any experiments, Nolan clarified that the required waveform for levitation would be terahertz waves, which he had not utilized. Coulthard highlighted that the U.S. Army possessed the necessary terahertz transmitter for potential experiments with the bismuth magnesium material. However, Dr. Nolan remained tight-lipped about the specifics, stating that he could not discuss whether such research had been conducted. Coulthard mentioned that Tom DeLonge, star to the Stars Academy, TTSA, worked with the U.S. Army to study this material using the right equipment, and Coulthard wondered why the U.S. government keeps such material if stories about flying objects are just made up. Nolan thinks there's a lot of false information out there, but believes there might be real materials that we should know about. He wants the government to tell us clearly if those special materials are real or not. In 2019, Tom DeLonge claimed that his UFO research organization had acquired potentially exotic materials featuring properties not from any known existing military or commercial application. The structure and composition of these materials are not from any known existing material or commercial application, Steve Justice, TTSO, COO and former head of Advanced Systems at Lockheed Martin Skunk Works, said in a statement. And according to the press release, some of these materials were in the possession of investigative journalist and UFO researcher Linda Moulton Howe, who in 2004 gave a presentation at the XCon conference regarding these materials. In her lecture, a video of which has been on the internet for years, she suggests that the material could be a lifting body that, with the right amount of electromagnetic, static, and certain RF frequency. These are undoubtedly the same materials mentioned by Tom DeLonge on his Joe Rogan interview, where he stated if you hit it with enough terahertz, it'll float. And in his video, Dr. Chester, a scientist from Quantum Gravity Research, makes several references to pulsed terahertz waves, and towards the end he mentions that pulsed terahertz waves in a metamaterial could slow down the speed of light. Can you imagine? He further explained that this is beneficial for anti-gravity engineering. According to him, due to the way everything couples together in the equations, a reduced speed of light requires less energy to achieve the desired anti-gravity effects. This is some really interesting information on terahertz thanks to observing the anomaly. AAWSAP commissioned 37 scientific papers that are now public. FOIA'd about UAP materials being studied, and DIA responded with 5 of these papers. One paper was a spintronics and another on metamaterials. TTSA bought an alleged sample of Roswell crash material and gave it to the Army to study in 2019. According to Puthoff, it appears to be a metamaterial that acts as a waveguide at the terahertz frequency. The 2 papers on spintronics and metamaterials also touches on creating materials that operate at this frequency, and specifically that such materials would be radiation resistant and ideal for long space travel. Can you imagine? Hal Puthoff also discusses the sample with UFO Joe, and you can notice the bolded statement below. So the answer is we don't yet really know where it came from, and it's true that 10 years ago Linda Howe provided us with a sample, And we did a lot of tests, got electron microscope pictures and irradiated it with various gigahertz frequencies, megahertz frequencies, and so on. We couldn't make anything out of it. So it kind of went on the shelf. And it was only after this paper on metamaterials was published, we said, oh my gosh, the claim here is that this could have some real utility as microscopic waveguides, would actually fit the structure, and that we see here. Okay, well, where do we go with that? Now, well, the truth of the matter is that piece is actually pretty mangled, and what you'd really like to do is say, okay, well, let's have a nice clean piece of this, and let's irradiate with terahertz frequency for all of it to see if it really does act as a microscopic waveguide for terahertz frequencies. And then, if that works, we'll irradiate it with other kinds of fields and see if there are any unexpected response, and so on. So it's still, despite the fact that it gets unbelievable publicity out there, it's still an absolutely unknown. It does range all the way from this was a fraud of junk material sent to us to no, this came off the wedge of an ET craft. We don't know the answer to that. And the only way that we're going to get something of value is to determine its properties, or maybe reproduce it under nice conditions and determine its properties. So it's still a giant question mark out there. So even though it's, it's like a few percent of our efforts at TTSA, to the Stars Academy, that is, it's like 99% of our criticisms. And then he laughed. And that's just what you get in this field. That's the way it goes. Some of us have developed very hard skins. Another question? Puthoff elaborates further on in another interview. Well, years later, decades later, actually, finally, our own science moved along. We moved into an area called metamaterials, and it turns out exactly this combination of materials at exactly those dimensions turn out to be an excellent microscopic waveguide for very high frequency electromagnetic radiation terahertz frequencies. So the wavelength is 60 microns, which is pretty small size, but it turns out because of the metamaterial aspect of this material, those bismuth layers that act as waveguides can be 1/20th the size of a wavelength, and usually when you make a waveguide, it's got to be about the size of the wavelength. So in fact, this turned out to be the material that would propagate sub-wavelength waveguide effects. Why somebody wants to do that, we still don't know the answer to that. Dr. Nolan is said to have a good friendship with Jacques Vallée, Kit Green, Eric Davis, and Colm Kelleher. They all came to him to analyze the UAP materials after he had developed some wonderful instruments using mass spectrometry. Some of the objects are nondescript and just lumps of metal. Mostly there's nothing unusual about them except that everywhere you look in the metal, the composition is different, which is odd. It's what we call inhomogeneous. That's a fancy way of saying incompletely mixed. The common thing about all the materials that I've looked at so far, and there's about a dozen, is that almost none of them are uniform. They're all hodgepodge mixtures. Each individual case will be composed of a similar set of elements, but they will be inhomogeneous, explained. Dr. Nolan found out that some of the fragments from the so-called UFO crash in Brazil have extraordinarily altered isotope ratios of magnesium. And he explained, it was interesting because another piece from the same event was analyzed in the same instrument at the same time. This is an extraordinary sensitive instrument called NanoSIMS, secondary ion mass spec. It had perfectly correct isotope ratios for what you would expect for magnesium found anywhere on Earth. Meanwhile, the other one was just way off, like 30% off the ratios. The problem is there's no good reason humans have for altering the isotope ratios of a simple metal like magnesium. There's no different properties of the different isotopes that anybody, at least in any of the literature that's public, of the hundreds of thousands of papers published, that says this is why you would do that. And now you can do it. It's a little expensive to do, but you'd have no reason for doing it. Dr. Vallée collected purported metal from the UFO cases dating back to 1947 and brought them to Stanford University for analysis. Dr. Gary Nolan, a Stanford microbiologist, utilized the 3D atomic structure of the unknown metal with a state-of-the-art multi-parameter ion beam imager, MIBI for short, capable of discerning the precise composition of matter at the level of its isotopes. The result might be shocking for non-believers, as when he put the sample in the vacuum chamber of the machine, he found out that their composition was unlike any other known metal on our Earth. If you're talking about an advanced metal from an advanced civilization, you're talking about something that I'll just call it an ultra material, right? It's something that which has properties where somebody's putting it together again at the atomic scale. So we're building our world with 80 elements. Somebody else is building the world with 253 different isotopes, Dr. Nolan said. Could humans be altering the isotopes in these strange objects for unknown purposes? Dr. Nolan speculates that it's possible, but providing it requires getting down to the atomic level, possibly with a superquantum interference device, SQUID for short. However, neither his budget nor the budgets of the groups analyzing UFO and UAP encounters have that kind of funding yet. And this is on Hows and Whys by Vicky Verma. So obviously, this is UFO material, and they have found ways to levitate it. Please leave your comments, and thank you for your support. Support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support, and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.